Much. Thanks, Don. Our next speaker up is a partner and a customer. CloudMine is the name of the company. They're solving the challenge of blending the public cloud with the private cloud for mobile applications by working with the Rackspace Managed Cloud. And here's a video to tell you more about CloudMine.
CloudMine is a mobile gateway. So basically our software sits in between the large set of corporate systems that exist today, like Oracle and SAP, and bridges that data securely out to the wider mobile internet. We've been growing very rapidly. We have a bunch of customers in both the Fortune 100 and the wider Fortune 500. We've seen some great customer growth over the past couple of years, and our goal is to really just keep solving the problems that our clients bring to us that involve mobility and secure data exchange. Rackspace is awesome. Rackspace is willing to roll up its sleeves and work with us to design an optimal architecture for our solution. It's like having our own very at-scale DevOps and engineering team outside of CloudMine that does a lot of the hard work and advising for us. A purely virtual cloud environment isn't necessarily secure enough for all use cases. What Rackspace has allowed us to do is to actually engage in a hybrid cloud deployment where we have bare metal dedicated servers in Rackspace's data centers that are holding all of the HIPAA compliant data. With Rackspace, we know that if we're up at 3 o'clock in the morning debugging a problem for our enterprise clients, we also have a phone number that we can call to get our dedicated Rackspace cloud engineers on the phone. So we have a full stack support system from the very lowest level of the bare metal servers all the way up to the application layer ready to go for our customers. And that's why they choose us over our competitors.
So please welcome the founder and the CTO of CloudMine, Marc Weil.
Thank you, sir. Thanks, John. Hello, everybody. My name is Marc Weil, and I am the CTO of a company called CloudMine. And today I will be standing in this box and not moving, as instructed. So what we're going to talk about today, as is a little bit different than what you saw in your pamphlet, is actually about regulatory compliance with mobile applications, specifically about HIPAA compliance and mobile health and how to achieve that in a very dynamic legal and regulatory environment. Before I get into the how, we'll talk a little bit about me, and then we'll talk a little bit about HIPAA compliance in general. So again, I'm Marc Weil. CloudMine is an enterprise-grade mobile gateway, and I am responsible for a lot of the product partnerships, as well as overall information security for our organization. And that is the last I will mention myself. So again, before we get into the how we can accomplish HIPAA compliance within a mobile environment, let's start with some definitions. So what is mobile health? According to according to GigaOM, mobile health is the use of wireless devices to manage health conditions, collect health data, monitor vital signs, provide clinical decision support, and access health information. So really what this means is that mobile health is data. Data can come from a lot of devices and a lot of places. So a couple examples here are consumer medical devices such as a Fitbit or a Nike Runkeeper, or a Nike Plus rather, or Runkeeper, an FDA-approved medical device, and this is something that's dedicated medical device, so a pacemaker or a hearing aid or any of those such devices. It can also come from an app on a smartphone. This plays in part with, of course, the Fitbit as well as electronic medical records. So these are the things that your doctor keeps on you whenever you go into an office for a visit. So really, again, mobile health is the collection, usage, and protection of all of this information. So let me give you a couple examples of some companies here. I mentioned Fitbit. All of these companies we see on the screen here collect health information from you in some way or another. Fitbit, of course, Apple's HealthBook, Epic, which is a big electronic medical record system, has a system called MyChart that allows you to keep all of your medical records in one place. Some smaller companies, VitalScore and BP rather, and VC, all sort of on the consumer to doctor engagement side. So each of these applications can collect data from you about your health, blood pressure, heart rate, your recorded video session with a psychologist, and has to store it somewhere. Now, of course, in order to do this safely, there are a number of challenges associated with it. And really, when it comes down to it, it's all about data security. You have all this data about you, and we have to somehow protect it. So now, a little bit of a history lesson. Basically, we have 2 laws in place right now that define how people have to protect your medical information. So we have HIPAA, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, and we have the HITECH Amendment. And we'll get a little bit into what these mean. So HIPAA was a law that was passed in 1996. It stands for the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. And HITECH was an amendment passed in Congress actually just last year, although it was submitted initially for review in 2009. And it stands for Health Information Technology for Economic and Clinical Health. And I really want to point out to you the 2 underlying terms we have here, just to show the difference in the inspiration behind both of these laws. In '96, we were really focused on insurance payers as well as healthcare providers. So it was really about the flow of your medical information to the people who would pay your health bill, as well as to new doctors who needed to file insurance claims on you. And now, in the modern day, in 2015, the HITECH Amendment basically is what allows information technology flow to occur with this type of information. So we're really switching our focus from insurance providers to information technology. So basically, the way these rules work is that HIPAA and HITECH are divided into 2 major categories. One's called the privacy rule, and one's called the security rule. So the privacy rule is all about disclosing health information to another doctor or insurance company. So let's say you go to your primary care physician, and he recommends that you go see a specialist, such as a podiatrist or a cardiologist. He, of course, needs permission to share your information with those new doctors. So I'm sure you all have filled out this paperwork before. You'll see it's the HIPAA authorized release form, and you fill it out and say, I hereby authorize you to give my data to this new doctor. So that's the privacy rule. The security rule focuses on the physical and technical safeguards of your data. So not just granting access to a new person who should have access to your data, but preventing unauthorized and potentially nefarious individuals from accessing your data in a bad manner. So for the purpose of this talk, we're going to focus really more on the security rules, since that's where a lot of the fun technical safeguards that we have to accomplish in a mobile environment come into play. And for those of you in the audience who have more of a development background, the difference between privacy and security rule are basically the differences between authorization and authentication, with, of course, encryption thrown in there as well. It's a very simplified analogy, but hope that it makes it a little more clear on the difference between the 2. There are a couple of unique aspects to dealing with healthcare and mobility. The first one is actually a really common problem in information technology today, especially within the enterprise world, and that's the BYOD trend, or the consumerization of IT, effectively meaning that now employees are able to bring their own personal mobile devices on site behind the firewall, connect to corporate network resources, and then remove the device again from site, keeping all the corporate resources on the phone. So this breaks a lot of corporate firewall strategies. Of course, since you can leave your phone in a taxi cab or at a bar, it really changes the game on how data is secured. So, really this gets into what happens to the data once it's on the device. You don't have a lot of control over that data once it's there. And again, if you are, you leave your phone in a cab and someone picks it up and you don't have a PIN code on it and you start looking at the data, you might be able to find potentially sensitive information there. And finally is the notion that it's very difficult for enterprise IT to support mobile devices that are accessing corporate resources from the internet. There's a lot of additional requirements that come into play, such as dealing with very long request response times, because maybe a mobile device is accessing your Oracle database over an edge network, and it takes 30 seconds for a request response cycle to actually occur. These are very real challenges that enterprise IT is currently trying to solve, and it applies just as strongly in the healthcare industry. On the other hand, the really interesting thing about HITECH is that if you think about it, we're in 2015 now. The law was introduced in 2009. It didn't really go into full effect until last year. So we have a 5-year gap between when the law was written and when it was actually passed by Congress. The problem with that is that between 2009 and 2014, there were massive strides made in mobile technology. People started to use devices more in more places and for more purposes, and started storing more corporate data and more potentially sensitive data on those devices. However, HITECH doesn't cover this. HITECH makes the fundamental assumption that all of the data that's covered under HIPAA is stored in a corporate environment behind a hardware firewall in a data center with physical security guidelines outlined. Did not focus on the distributed nature of mobile devices at all. And to add to that, the FDA has thrown its hat in the ring as well and is starting to try to figure out how to regulate mobile apps as if they were medical devices. They just released a brand new set of laws last year, or not laws, but rulings last year, that basically delineate between mobile applications that are medical devices and that are not. So now app developers have to be even more careful as to the specific wording of content and push notifications that come into a mobile device. For example, a mobile app. So for example, if a mobile app gives you diagnostic information, if it says you are sick, you should take 20 milligrams of Tylenol, that's a medical device. So that has to go through FDA clinical trials and certification in order to be released. However, if an app simply says, hey, we think that you might not be feeling well, if that's the case, you should go see your doctor. That's not a medical device. So it's a very interesting, new, and evolving area, and it's really changing all the time. So what I'm going to get into now is really how we can achieve HIPAA compliance or HIPAA readiness, more appropriately, within a mobile environment. So the security rule, it's really broken down into 6 fundamental tenets. So we have the encryption of data at rest as well as in transit, plus the physical separation of PII from PHI. This is more commonly referred to in the legal language as de-identification of PII from PHI. There are a lot of lawyers out there that disagree about the part in bold, the no cloud part, but I always find that it's better to err on the side of safety. I'll get into what no cloud means in a moment. Finally, the last 3 are comprehensive intrusion detection systems, multi-tiered logging facilities. This means not only who accessed my system, who performed a pseudo login attempt, so who wanted to get administrative access to the server, but also who is making changes to individual data records at the field level and when, from where, with whose credentials, and from what type of device. You have to be able to audit that to figure out if someone's medical records were tampered with, potentially years down the line. And finally is breach notifications. So as a product provider where you are certified under HIPAA, you have to have a documented way to notify your clients if there's a breach or a suspected breach. And that all has to be audited by a third-party firm. So let me get into one particular element of this, which is the separation of PII from PHI. I'm going to use CloudMine's method as an example simply because I think that we have a fairly elegant way of accomplishing this from a technical perspective. But of course, if you're looking to build your own system that deals with this, this is just a suggestion for you. I don't mean for this to be a product plug or anything. So what I have up on the screen are 2 really, really basic examples of PII and PHI. These are both JSON objects, fairly straightforward even if you're not a developer. They're just records. You can see on the top here, we have some example PII. We have Jonathan Smith, age 53, and on the bottom, we have basically a really simple medical record for him. So he has a lot of problems. He's a fairly messed up individual. He has high blood pressure and high HDL cholesterol and diabetes type 2. He also has had ACL surgery on both of his ACLs because he's an athlete and he's on a ton of Vicodin. So this is it's a pretty interesting medical case if anybody in here is a doctor. I don't really know what his problem is, but anyway. So this is really basic illustration of the difference between PII and PHI. The other field in here that I want to make sure that we point out are these PIDs. So PID is just my name for patient ID. And a patient ID is basically a unique identifier that can identify the patient across these data stores, which is important for correlation later. The important part is it cannot be stored together. These have to be fully separate data stores, fully separate encryption technologies or private keys in order to really be at your safest for the law. So the way that we actually accomplish this from a development perspective is we have an API key management suite as part of our software. And we repurpose those API keys to identify PII from PHI. So when the mobile app developer is building the actual iPhone or the Android app, and he or she is looking to save data that's been input or collected from the patient, he or she needs to use the correct API key. You can see the 2 sort of unique strings of characters on each of those arrows there to identify which is which type. Once it's tagged, so to speak, with this information, it flows through our system, and this is a very high-level diagram. You'll have to forgive me. It's pretty generic. But it flows through our system and eventually hits this data router. And the data router is very important because this is the part that determines where the data should be stored based on the API key. So based on the API key, basically, the system makes a determination of whether it should go into the PII-only encrypted database cluster or the PHI database cluster, which actually doesn't even need to be encrypted, although we do it anyway just to be safe. The reason for this is multi-tiered, but really it means that if somebody gains unauthorized access to your system and is able to go into the database file system, since it's encrypted at rest, first off, the hacker won't be able to do anything with the extracted database files once they download them. And furthermore, even if they did happen to break the encryption and decrypt the files they got, they only have half the equation. They might only have a list of names and ages, or they might only have a list of random medical conditions, but they have no way of associating them unless they go through and hack an entirely separate data cluster. So it's just adding layers to the onion, so to speak, in an attempt to continue making it more difficult for them to actually get access to the data. So the final piece of this equation is what are known as BAAs. So this is a new concept that was introduced with the passing of high tech. And let me give you a little history on what it used to be before BAAs. So let's say that I'm a hospital system. Let's say I'm Johns Hopkins. And I have hired a bunch of subcontractors that deal with a lot of data integrity, data storage, financial audits, et cetera. And one of those subcontractors has a data breach and ends up leaking out PII and PHI about some of my patients. The problem is that I, as Johns Hopkins, am liable without a BAA because I'm the covered entity, as the law goes. What a BAA does is allows you to delineate the risks and responsibilities that are taken on by each vendor in the value chain from the care provider down to the lowest level of subcontractor. So that, at least in our case, we can easily say, look, this data was leaked from the client side of the phone because you, the app developer, forgot to kill the cache on the phone after a certain amount of time. Therefore, this breach is your fault. Or they can point to us and say, this data was leaked from within your databases, and the BAA says that that's your responsibility, so it's your fault, CloudMine. So this is a really, really critical part to the legal structure that's in place to maintain the integrity of everybody in the chain for HIPAA compliance. We learned a lot of lessons. It actually took us probably about a year to achieve what we've achieved in terms of HIPAA readiness and then further training to our customers to make them fully HIPAA compliant. But there's really four things that we've learned overall. So the first one is, as I mentioned, federal regulations fall far behind the current state of technology, as I mentioned with the passing of high tech. So there's a lot of gray area in the laws, and in a lot of ways it's unfortunate for us because there's going to be a lot of legal definitions in the courtroom. So there's going to be a lot of private dollars going into that. The next thing we learned is that a lot of regulations out there, such as PCI or FedRAMP, also have a lot of shared characteristics and requirements with HIPAA. So if you are a company that's going after a lot of regulatory compliance certifications, getting one also helps you get the others. ISO 27001 is another really big one that helps you achieve everything. It's all about risk mitigation, so when in doubt, take the least risky option you can possibly take. And finally, you have to document everything. Basically, it's your job as someone who's trying to achieve HIPAA compliance to document everything that you've done within your company to reduce the risk of data breach. If you do receive a breach or you receive an audit, they're going to come in and they're going to say, did you do everything in your power to prevent this? And if the answer is yes, even if it's not technically to the strict letter of the law, you're going to get a pass or a reduced fine. So it's really important to make sure that security manuals, security training, business continuity documents, et cetera, are all in place and actually map to a lot of the sections of HIPAA and high tech. And thank you for listening. That's all I have. I appreciate your time and enjoy the rest of the conference.